Welcome to this Payments Unpacked podcast. Today, I'm really pleased to be joined by Stephen Quick. Now, Stephen is the CEO and co-founder at an organisation called Fincrime Dynamics. And if you look at Fincrime Dynamics' landing page, it claims to help clients hold better defences against financial crime through testing, tuning and training. Now, with the backdrop of eye-watering levels of authorised push payment fraud and the introduction of a mandatory reimbursement requirement this coming Monday, the 7th of October 2024, now is a perfect time to get Fincrime Dynamics' perspective on payment fraud and hear a little bit about their mission. So, with Fincrime Dynamics' landing page having that bold claim, Stephen, to help clients hold better defences against financial crime, I wonder if you could perhaps introduce yourself and give us a little bit about the company that you've co-founded.
Absolutely. Well, hello, Mike. Thanks very much for having me on the podcast. Yep, I am Stephen Quick, the CEO and co-founder of Fincrime Dynamics. And it's a pleasure to be here. I'm a big fan of the podcast. I think it's a really great resource for anyone wanting to learn about the payments landscape in the UK. And personally, I also enjoy the occasional history lesson on there. So I'm very pleased to be here today. Yeah, so Fincrime Dynamics in a nutshell. So we are a financial crime intelligence sharing data platform. So we are looking to address the issues that the industry has around data and the crucial resource that data is to help build defenses against financial crime, and also to reinvent the way that we look at intelligence sharing as well. And yes, we're using these data resources to enable our clients to improve their defenses.
Fantastic. And we're going to drill down into some of those aspects of what you're looking to do. But just before we do, I was really interested in your take on the fraud challenge that the UK is facing today.
I think fraud is a really interesting problem to be trying to solve. It's the most common crime in the UK now. I think it's around a third of crime in the UK is fraud. And I think the common stats are that around 1% of police resourcing goes into fighting it. So the big question there is, well, who is responsible for fighting fraud? And the answer really is more and more becoming the financial institution's responsibility to do that. It's an interesting landscape that we now find ourselves in, and authorised push payment frauds or scams really is the hot topic at the moment. And as in particular the payment industry has evolved, what we've seen is that there's been a movement to a cashless society. There's been a movement to instant payments, faster payments, and what's happened is that fraud has evolved with that change, and we now in a situation where authorised push payment frauds account for roughly 40% of fraud in the UK. So in other words, victims are unwittingly making payments to scammers, and what needs to happen, of course, is that we need to see the defences to keep up with the rapid pace of fraudsters and how their techniques are evolving.
So that's the challenge that we're facing here in the UK. As you've thought and co-founded this company, can you just give me a little bit of insight into the opportunity that you're seeking to address, and having identified that opportunity, how you're doing that?
Yeah, well, as fraud has evolved, what of course we've seen is that some of the defences against fraud have also changed dramatically. Fraudsters are using AI to their advantage, but so are financial institutions. The most common use of AI in all of financial services is now in fraud detection. So commonly machine learning models being trained to detect fraudulent behaviour. What we've seen, though, is that with that movement towards new tools like machine learning, there are very different resources which are actually required to make sure that they're effective. So, in blunt language, if you need good machine learning effectiveness, you need good data to help power that. You need good data to help train it, and you need in that data to have reflective financial crime behaviour, because that is what the machine learning models are being trained to detect. So what we have seen across the industry is that data is actually very, very difficult for institutions to get hold of. Even internally, it can be very messy to get hold of data. The internal data might have several limitations, a key one being that training data is often out of date. and fraud is moving at an incredibly fast pace. So we need to make sure that the financial crime behaviors are in the data that's used to train these models. And then, of course, we've got this issue of intelligence sharing. So intelligence sharing has always been a problem in the industry, and it requires collaboration, which is not an easy thing to achieve. So what we've identified is that actually the intelligence sharing piece requires not only collaboration, but also for the intelligence sharing to be around the information, which is crucial here. So if we look at machine learning applications to detect financial crime, what we actually need is not just anecdotal knowledge of different types of financial crime, but we actually need it in the data resources. So it's all well and good being aware of different types of financial crime, but if it's not in the data that's being used to train the models, then those models that are being used to detect financial crime will not be optimal. So that's a really interesting space that we're trying to address with our technology, and we're coming at it from an angle of we see big barriers around how confidential the information around fraud is, and also that there's a lot of client-sensitive information in data that's being used to help financial crime. So we created a simulation and synthetic data engine, which enables us to simulate not just financial crime, but actually focusing on the behaviors of financial crime, the patterns of financial crime, which models are required to detect, and then also look at how we can share intelligence regarding financial crime in a confidential way. So by using simulations and synthetic data, we are able to create a level of collaboration in the industry where industry players are able to share intelligence around financial crime, which can be simulated and shared throughout the industry without creating that level of potentially embarrassment for an institution around being hit by a financial crime, or the sensitivities around that. So we're very quickly able to distribute the intelligence around financial crime, which is now needed for the applications that are being used to help fight it.
Fantastic. A really helpful explanation from you, and I think of the history of data and whose data is it and how do I share the data and what can I share and what can't I share. Certainly some challenges, but you've started to unpack there some of the benefits that when you start to be able to share data, you can tackle the fraud that's going through the system. And I wanted to just to turn a little bit in terms of how you might apply this to some of your clients, because your website states that you help clients hold better defences against financial crime, and it's through 3 T's: tuning, testing and training. And it's the better defence that I was interested in. I'm well used to better defence. I live below sea level, and we've got seawalls giving us good defence and better defence against water coming through the village I live in. So with that in mind about defence, stopping something happen, what does a better defence look like for a payments provider?
So I think that's actually a shifting problem. So traditionally we've looked at how good defense is by measuring certain metrics, like how much financial crime losses are actually experienced in real life. So what is the loss that actual clients are experiencing here? Then, of course, financial institutions are looking at other sort of internal metrics. The false positive rate is a very key one, because we all know that for each pound that's lost to a financial crime fraud, there's several more that are spent on the operations within a financial institution. So reducing false positives and making sure that there's less resource going into actually into the investigations of financial crime when it's not necessarily required is very important. But what we're looking at is to not only create a more effective detection of financial crime, so to help financial institutions increase their transaction monitoring, where they're detecting more financial crime and doing that in a more efficient way, where there's less false positives that are being produced. What we're actually really excited about doing is now being able to be proactive rather than reactive in the way that we look at defense against financial crime. So in other words, by raising the awareness of financial crime threats and behavior through simulation and synthetic data and sharing that intelligence and data resource, we're able to think about threats that haven't necessarily hit a financial institution yet. So in our mind, it's not just a case of reducing the losses and reducing false positives. It's also a case of increasing that security around threats that haven't necessarily occurred yet.
Okay, interesting in terms of better defences. I wanted to ask you next about the first rule of payments. Now, I've been in payments for quite a number of decades. I started in the city in the 1980s. That's how many decades I've done in payments. And the first rule of payments I learned has been with me through my whole career. And that first rule is every debit has a credit. And on Monday, we see the introduction of authorised push payment fraud, mandatory reimbursement, and we start to look at both the application and the reimbursement and protections, both at the debit side and the credit side. Why is it vital that fraud models look at both sides of the transaction?
Well, this is a very timely moment for us to be speaking about this, of course. So, yeah, in less than a week's time, we're going to see the introduction of the reimbursements for APP fraud, which means there will be a 50-50 split, so 50% coming from the sender and 50% coming from the receiver. I think it's nothing new really that organisations have tried to stop fraud leaving their accounts, but the introduction of a 50% reimbursement from the receiver is certainly something that's very new to the industry, and what we're seeing from the conversations we're having with financial institutions is that it's really an area that has been largely overlooked in comparison to looking at the outbound side. So what's becoming very clear is that we need to build defences that are effective at spotting when fraud is being received into a financial institution now. And that's a very new problem statement to the one where probably resources has gone into.
Okay, well, we just looked at a first rule of payments. I think the next question I'm going to ask you is about the inevitability of payments, because fighting fraudsters can often feel like a game of whack-a-mole. How can a business stay ahead of the fraudster and minimise the number of successful APP fraud attempts they experience?
So this is probably an area where we have quite a different approach to what's currently going on in the industry. So you're right when you mention the sort of whack-a-mole approach, but I think if we zoom out, what we see is that there's actually this there's a fraud landscape which is occurring in front of us, where fraudsters will naturally look for weaknesses in defences, and they'll look for weaknesses in certain financial institutions, which they will then exploit. It's very common to see fraudsters exploit one financial institution where they see a gap and then move on to another one, which means we have this situation where financial institutions might be hit by a certain fraudulent technique, and another financial institution might be completely unaware that they're exposed to it and about to get hit by it. So the way that we're looking to address this is, first of all, by creating this industry-wide lens on what the fraud landscape looks like. And the first stage of that is to actually make sure everybody's talking the same language when it comes to fraud, and in particular APP fraud. So our approach to this is that we've actually designed APP fraud taxonomy. So our vision here is that we want the entire industry to be completely aligned on how we define authorized push payment fraud, and to have a level of understanding not only about the fraud but the behaviors of certain types of fraud, and hone in on the behaviors, because with new detection tools like machine learning focused on behavior, I think understanding techniques to a detailed level is absolutely essential to building the right defences. So what we want to do is to be able to align everyone on what the risk exposures are to start with, and then to be able to map out who is particularly exposed to the different threats. And what we're able to do there is through our solutions that we're building. So we just launched a new solution called Scam Hunter, and what we've done there is essentially build this industry-wide repository of APP fraud techniques and simulate those techniques into behavioral data, which what we're looking to do is to test financial institutions' controls to spot where the gaps are. What we're able to do with that is, of course, to highlight where the gaps are so they can be plugged, so we can make sure that they're minimizing the risk of them actually being exposed to an attack in that area. And of course, we want to be able to make sure that we can also assess the impact, so the likelihood of these different types of fraudulent events by looking at what's going on at the wider industry. So our aim here is that we want to make sure that we can understand which institutions are exposed and to benchmark each other to see where there is an area that they really need to clamp down on before it happens. So this proactive defense of identifying where the problems are and making sure that we address them. The second part of this is, of course, that we also want financial institutions to be able to quantify in much more detail the exposure in terms of losses and costs of dealing with those. So it's a common problem that we see, that financial institutions find it very difficult to make decisions around investing in certain types of defences without having quantifiable information there, which of course results in massive exposures to financial crime not being addressed until the worst event actually happens. So what we want to do is to shine a lens on that, or shine a light on that, so that we can make sure that these financial institutions are equipped and able to quantify their risk exposure.
Very, very helpful description there, and I tip my hat to anybody who's out there seeking to thwart the endeavours of the fraudster. So all the very best as you look to explore this avenue and roll out the benefits of Fincrime Dynamics. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts today, both about a little bit about you, but particularly around the mission of the organisation that you've co-founded. Stephen, what's the best way that we could make contact with you?
Very easily. We have a website. It's fincrimedynamics.com. If anyone wants to go on the website, they can find contact details on there, or search for us on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. The traditional way is go to my website and go to LinkedIn. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening today. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast. And also, while you're doing that, subscribe to my Payments Unpacked newsletter at payments-unpacked.com. Thanks for listening.